And what's going on, everybody? Hope everybody's enjoyed their off season, and it is about to be kickoff time here in the college football season. And yes, SEC talk is back for another season. Been rolling strong since 2016, so we're heading into our 8th year. So really excited to get this show on the road. So we're going to be previewing a little bit of the Week Zero matchups. None of the SEC teams are in Week Zero. But we are still going to get into those games, and then we're going to get to a little bit of some fun segments. We're going to roll through some of our surprise teams, our dark horse, or SEC championship picks. So a lot in store. But Wade, how you feel about returning for yet another season here on SEC Talk?
Yeah, it's awesome to be back with you, Tyler. And
Going
8 years,
on,
wow,
yeah.
that's pretty crazy. I know I wasn't a part of the initial seasons, maybe jumped in there about 5 years ago, but still great that we're back for another season. And I think it's going to be fun with the expansion and adding Oklahoma and Texas to the conference. Um, I just think there's going to be a whole new element to the league.
Yeah, I mean, with Texas and Oklahoma now joining the conference for the 16, and no longer on the SEC on CBS, it's going to be the ESPN network that we're going to be taking over. So, how do you feel about the SEC going from CBS to ESPN?
I think it's probably better coverage overall. I think I'll miss the nostalgia of that intro for CBS. But overall, I think ESPN kind of has the crown on college football. So I think it's only right to have the best league on the best network. And I think they'll do it right.
Yeah, so let's get right to it as we always do, looking at our SEC teams in the AP Top 25 poll. And as you notice, there's a lot of teams on this. You know, with Texas and Oklahoma now join the conference, there's going to be more teams in the mix, but let's get right on through it. Let's go on now to starting at number one. Should be really to no surprise to anybody. This is a Georgia team that's right back in the race, one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC and in the country, with Carson Beck. And then you got looking at the running back position, it's going to be led by Trevor Etienne, and then there's going to be a lot of talent in the receivers. So this is going to be a team on both sides of the ball that's really going to be good. And then number four, Texas, one of the new teams coming in from the Big 12 to the SEC. Like Georgia, they're also got a lot of talent. They did lose some key pieces on the defensive side of the ball, but offense, I mean, you got Isaiah Bond from Alabama in the transfer portal. You got Quinn Ewers back. So this is going to be a team. Look at their schedule. It's a little bit tough, but they're definitely one of the heavy favorites to win the SEC. And, you know, they're coming into their first season, so they're going to get a taste of it. So we'll see how the Longhorns do, but they sit at number four. Number five, Alabama, their first season post Nick Saban. We'll see how Kalen DeBoer does in his first season coming from Washington. Still a lot of talent on both sides of the ball, too, with this team. You got Jalen Milroe leading the offense. You know, you did lose your best wide receiver in Isaiah Bond, like I was just mentioning, but that defense, I think that defense is going to play every single week. So this is an Alabama team that I don't think that's going to go away like people really thought that they would. And then number six is Ole Miss. I feel like Ole Miss has been the talk of the town. Lane Kiffin, I mean, he hit the transfer portal hard, a lot of talent. You do lose Quinshon Judkins, but I feel like you return the bunch in the receivers. One of the talented receiving classes that you can see for Ole Miss. And so this is going to be a team, probably going to be the number one offense in the SEC. There's going to be a lot of talent on this team. So Ole Miss finds themselves at number six. Missouri, fresh off an 11-win season. We'll see if Eli Drinkwitz and the boys can do well. They sit at number 11. Number 13 is LSU, the Tigers. They're going to be having a big game in week number one against USC in Las Vegas to set the tone. But LSU also has some talent to fill. Without Jaden Daniels, the quarterback, it's now going to be going towards Garrett Nussmeier. And then number 15 is Tennessee. I feel like Tennessee is going to be one of those sneaky teams that we're going to be talking about. You're probably going to see Nico a couple of times in our SEC fantasy. So this is a team that has a lot of talent too. So I think that their schedule also sets up well nicely for them. We'll probably get to them in just a minute. Number 16, Oklahoma. There's our second new SEC team in there. So we have two of the Big 12 teams moving to new conferences, both in this top 25. Oklahoma definitely is going to be, I think, a team that's probably not getting a lot of hype, coming from the Big 12 like Texas is. But I think that Oklahoma is going to do just fine in their first season. And And then Texas A&M. I mean, it can't be an AP top 25 poll in the preseason without an A&M being here.
Throw 'em in there.
So, Wade, what's your overall thoughts? Who's too high? Who's too low here?
I think mostly it looks correct to me. I mean, I agree with the top 6 for sure. In that order. I mean, I don't think Alabama's going to disappear, like you mentioned. I think Ole Miss is getting a lot of hype, but I think it's warranted. Missouri, they're not a surprise team anymore. They're right there in the top 15. Some people might even say top 10. And Tennessee and Oklahoma, I can't fault that. I think they will be top 20 teams by season end. I think they'll have some ups and downs. I don't think they're contenders, but I think they are solid teams. And then A&M, I mean, there probably shouldn't be 20 teams better than them in the country. I mean, they recruit well. They have a lot of facilities and resources to be a good team. So if you're just taking a guess at those bottom 5 teams in the top 25, I mean, I think they're as good of a guess as anybody. But yeah, they're joining the likes of Miami and Southern Cal as just being ranked every year for what, but yeah, I mean, I think that if they play to their talent, they could be a top 25 team.
I definitely agree. I think that the AP poll, at least in the SEC, is right. I feel like Georgia and Texas are really putting themselves in a category of their own right now. And then you have Alabama, Ole Miss, Missouri probably in that second tier. Then after that, I think that LSU, it could be a wild card team. Tennessee could also too. And then you could say the same thing for Oklahoma and Texas A&M. They definitely have a lot of talent to be in that top 25. But if things go wrong, I mean, this got, from LSU to Texas A&M, they be 6-6, 2-8-4 if things go wrong, especially on one side of the ball. But I think nonetheless, starting off with 9 SEC teams in the top 25, that's pretty good for a conference. So welcome in Texas and Oklahoma, and we are going to welcome them in SEC Fantasy. So we're going to see who's going to be the first Longhorn and who's going to be the first Sooner to be picked. So SEC Fantasy will be returning next week as we get our cast of characters in week number 1, as we'll kick off week 1 festivities on next week's show right here on Sunday night. As always, we want to remind you to our fans watching, if you have any questions pertaining to SEC football, feel free to leave us a comment. We already saw Neil drop it in saying that he wants to be on after week 1 at LSU. We could definitely make that happen. Hopefully LSU can get the victory there and represent the SEC well in Las Vegas. So if you have any questions, whether you're on Facebook, Twitch, or YouTube, that's what we're streaming on right now. I definitely feel free to leave us a comment as the show goes on. All right, let's get into now out of the conference before we get into our in-conference and our preseason predictions. We have some week 0 games coming up. This is pretty much the last weekend that we're in right now without meaningful college football games. Next weekend, we'll be watching, the Florida States, the Hawaiis, the SMUs. So we have a little bit of games, only 4 games here on the radar. None featuring the SEC, which honestly is a good thing. SEC playing in week 0 is pretty pointless to me. So we do have Thursday games, though, kicking off, I think, with Missouri. So we will definitely get into all of those games in next week's show. But for now, let's get into week 0 games, starting off with the one in Ireland between number 10 Florida State, the Seminoles, coming off of undefeated season, looking strong. DJU coming from Oregon State. He's coming back to the ACC, sets the storyline himself to watch outside of the conference. Then Georgia Tech with Haynes King. We talked about him a lot, I felt like, last season, coming from A&M to his first season in Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech, had some quality wins last season, with that rink-a-dink game of Miami down there where Miami should have had the win. And then all of a sudden, Georgia Tech came from nowhere and won that game. And then they beat North Carolina when North Carolina was highly ranked. So this is a very crucial game for both of these ones, especially Florida State, if they want to get back to the playoff race into the ACC championship conversation. So who do you have taking this early kickoff in Ireland?
Yeah, I think this one's going to be pretty good. People maybe are underestimating Georgia Tech a little bit. I think Florida State's a team that maybe is getting a little too much hype. They are replacing a lot of talent. I don't think they're going to be bad. I still picked them to win their conference.
They're not going to be as good as last year, though. There's no way.
Yeah. I mean, you're replacing your quarterback, running back, and wide receiver 1.
An entire defense.
Yeah. Another first-round pick in Verse. So yeah, I think they're going to be good. I just think that maybe this team's not as good as they're hyped to be. But I think they get it done here against Georgia Tech. I think it'll be lower scoring and close, but I think Florida State will pull away. I think the defense is going to be pretty solid, but I don't think it's going to be the best offensive game with the travel and all the new pieces. Yeah. So I'll give them. I'm going to give them like a 24-17 type victory.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. Going back to the past 2 years in the Ireland game, 2 years back it was Nebraska Northwestern. It was a high scoring shootout. Then last year, Navy and Notre Dame, that was the mismatch to start with. I think that this is going to be a really good game. Really, nobody, I don't think, is giving Georgia Tech a chance. I think that Georgia Tech really has a good chance. Like, if you're going to get Florida State, you got to get it early because this is going to be an offense that's starting to figure it out. You got a new quarterback. You no longer have like Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, like pretty much all of your offensive production from last season is gone. So this is going to be a new look Florida State offense and a new look defense too. Like you just mentioned, no more Jared Verse and no more Braden Fisk in the middle. So you don't have your elite pass rushers there. So I think that this is going to be a grinded out game, going to be a low scoring game. But I am going to give the nod to Florida State. But if I look at my phone at 3:00 and see Georgia Tech winning, would it shock me? Not at all. I could definitely see the Yellow Jackets pull off the upset. But for Florida State to really have a good season, they have to win this because if they don't, it could get real ugly. I could see this, if they lose this one, this could be like a 7-5, 6-6 season for them. So DJU in this offense is going to start off strong. So I think it's going to be 21-17. It's going to be a very grinded out game over there in Ireland. And I think that Florida State, with a talent gap, with Florida State and Georgia Tech, I think that is going to come down to it, especially in the fourth quarter. So give me Florida State in an ugly game over the pond. So that's probably our best game in week number 0. Not going to lie, all the other ones aren't much to talk about, but we are going to pick it. So we have 3 more games to go to. Like I mentioned, not very good matchups as we have Montana State going on to New Mexico. And I must say about New Mexico, not a great season for them in the Mountain West. They were at one of the bottom teams in the Mountain West. Look at this year's Mountain West. Boise State's probably the favorite. Fresno is going to have a really good team too, and then Air Force. Those are probably the top 3 teams, and then UNLV will make some noise. So I'm sure that this is going to be a pretty easy pick for both of us.
Yeah, I'm just going to go with New Mexico being at their FBS, but Montana State, I think they've made some noise, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is an early season upset. But I think that overall, most of the time the FBS team should win these games.
Yeah, this is just your typical FBS matchup that you see here in week number 0. So this is just a little tune-up game for New Mexico. Will this set up for a great season for New Mexico? We will just have to see. The Mountain West, like I just mentioned, is loaded. I didn't even talk about Colorado State, and they're returning one of the top quarterbacks and also top wide receivers in that conference. So can't forget about them either. But yeah, I'm going to go New Mexico. Don't really want to spend too much time on this one, so we'll go to the next one. This is an interesting matchup because you talk about new teams going from a conference to the conference. SMU is one of those teams that I think that could really make some noise in the ACC. Coming from the American Conference, or winning that conference, and then Nevada, another Mountain West team that didn't do so hot last season. We'll see if they can bounce back. So this is a tough road trip. They're going to get used to it. They got a trip with Stanford, maybe Cal. So they're getting their flight miles already in week number 0. So do you have the Mustangs getting off to a nice start here in 2024?
Yeah, I do. I think the road game makes you pause a little bit, but look where these teams are at. Nevada has had a really rough off season, a lot of allegations, and it looks like they're in for a rough season. And SMU, to me, looks like they're primed to be pretty good. I think they'll go 7-5 or so, maybe 8-4 in their first ACC season. So I think they get off on the right start here. But honestly, this might be one of their shorter trips because they'll have conference games at Syracuse and Miami, Boston College. Those are going to be long trips.
Yeah, that's going to be some good news too here in the new college football. There's going to be a lot of teams that are going to have to go from one coast to the other coast. Like the ACC and the Big Ten are probably the 2 conferences. So that's what we like about the SEC. We're keeping it regional here.
Everybody touches everybody.
Yep. But yeah, this is pretty easy. I'm very high on SMU. I think that they're a very dark horse team in the ACC. If things go right for them, I could definitely see them get back to Charlotte and potentially win the ACC, because the ACC this year is top heavy. You're looking at Florida State, Clemson, Louisville, Miami. Those are your pick of the litter teams at the top. And I think there's going to be some teams in the middle like Virginia Tech, SMU. We were looking at Syracuse schedule on our other podcast, and their schedule is very easy. So I think that SMU gets a nice win out there on the West Coast, beat Nevada, because Nevada, like I mentioned, I'm not really sold on them in the Mountain West. Let's go to our last one, and it's probably not a game that we probably shouldn't even talk about. You know what? It's just college football games to pick. But Delaware State at Hawaii. Do you see Hawaii pulling this one off?
Man, what did they have to do to get them to fly all the way out there?
Talk about long road trips. This might be the longest one of the season.
Yeah, good for Delaware State's players and parents and fans that are making the trip. So, yeah, they'll enjoy that. But I think Hawaii will get probably one of their few wins this year. I mean, this is a team that's been traveling for years just based on where they're at, even though they're in a West Coast conference. But yeah, I don't see them matching up too well in the Mountain West this year, but I do think they can get it done here in week 1.
Yeah, Hawaii is always, getting some victories in week. I feel like Hawaii is always playing in week 0. Like a couple of years ago, they were playing Vandy, and they just got steamrolled by Vandy that one week. Like we both picked Hawaii to win. Yeah, this is like the only time that I'm picking Hawaii when they're playing FCS school that's to travel, like I mentioned, from one coast to pretty much a little island out there in the Pacific Ocean. But it's going to be at least a vacation for them, a nice payday. But, yeah, I think that Hawaii gets one of their few wins because it's not going to be pretty for them in the Mountain West. So they got to get their wins while they can. So both rolling with the Rainbow Warriors. So now that is our only games in week number 0. Now let's turn our attention back here to the SEC. Our 2024 SEC football preseason preview, and it's just not going to be all cut and dry. We're just not going to just pick our SEC championship winners. We're going to go through a little bit of categories here, going from surprise teams, disappointment, worst teams, whatever you shape it. So let's get into the first of many categories that we have lined up. Wade, which team will exceed expectations in 2024? There's a lot of them that could be on this list, but who are you rolling with?
Yeah, so I think you could look at the top of the list and pick one of those teams we saw listed on the AP preseason top 25, but I kind of swung from the bottom of the conference because I think every team that's in that top 25, has pretty high expectations. So I'm going to go with the team that probably just missed the top 25. I'm going to go with Kentucky. I think this is a team that nobody's really talking about, but really, what did they lose? I mean, they lost their quarterback Devin Leary, who was a massive bust for SEC play. I mean, he really did nothing in the conference. I think you upgraded there by bringing in Vandergrift from Georgia, who honestly probably would be starting for a lot of teams if he wasn't sitting behind the best quarterback in the conference and Carson Beck. So I think he's got a lot to prove, and I think overall this team returns a lot of their talent at receivers. They're always going to have a stud running back. We'll see who that is this year. And I think on defense, this team is pretty decent. So I'm not saying they're going to win it or anything, but I think this team's like being picked at like 5-7, 6-6, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're 8-4 at the end of the year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised at all. I completely agree with you. I mean, the quarterback play was not what we expected from Devin Leary coming from NC State. He had a couple of appearances like every now and then, like, okay, this is the Devin Leary, but it wasn't a full consistent season that Kentucky needed for them. Because like Kentucky, I feel like every season they're either starting out 5-0, 6-0, and they get to that first game, and then boom, they just get punched in the mouth. And after they get their first loss, the losses just keep on piling over. But I do agree with you on the offensive side of the ball. Vandergrift is definitely an upgrade for them. Now, losing Ray Davis isn't always easy, but like you mentioned, Kentucky, I feel like in the past, like couple of years, they've been really good at running back. I'll go all the way to, Rodriguez, and you had Benny Snell, and then last year, Ray Davis. So there's going to be somebody that's going to be stepping up. And then they also have a really good wide receiver group too. And then the defense, was really good for them last season. So I think with Mark Stoops being your head coach, they're always going to be consistent. I feel like Kentucky has been like consistent, 7-5, 8-4. You know, they'll have every now and then they'll have a 9-3, 10-2 season. So yeah, it would not shock me if you would look up at December and this team is 8-4, maybe potentially 9-3 if things go right. But yeah, I definitely agree with that pick. So yeah, usually we would say a good pick there in the SEC East, but this year it's everybody up for grabs. So I definitely like that pick. I'm going to go to the Auburn Tigers for this one. I think really looking at their schedule, they do have some tough games. You know, you get Oklahoma at home. You do have to face Alabama and Georgia too. So, you know, those, like, if I would say right now, would they win those games? Probably not. But I just think that there is going to be some sort of jump from Peyton Thorne. I don't think that could get much worse for him. Last season wasn't very good. I'm very high on Jarquez Hunter. I think you're going to be seeing a lot of us talk about him. I think that Jarquez Hunter, one of the best running backs here in the SEC. And this defense, what we know about Auburn, they're going to bring their defense pretty much every single week. And you got a guy like Hugh Freeze, you know, not this first season that I had in mind for him coming into the SEC. You know, he has SEC experience, but really tinkering with that offense. So I don't know. There's just something about Auburn. I just think that this is a program that you can't keep down for long. So not really many people are talking about it. And I think that's exactly fine. That's what they want. They want to play that underdog role. So not the season that they won it. They did not make a bowl game last year. So I think that their expectations are probably like 6-6, 7-5. I can see this team being an 8-4 team like you have Kentucky. So I'm going to go to Auburn having be my team exceeding expectations. So we have Kentucky and Auburn exceeding the expectations. And now let's go to a team that will fall short of expectations. So do you have one of the bigger teams falling short of expectations here?
Yeah, and I think I'll keep it short on this slide because you're probably going to be shocked. But if we go through some of the next slides, I think it will make sense. But
Yeah.
the team that I have falling short of expectations is none other than the number 1 ranked Georgia Bulldogs.
Ooh.
And I think the expectation is a national championship. So when you're that good, it's championship or bust. And I don't see Georgia getting there this year. I think this is going to be a very good team, but I think there's some teams in the SEC that have a little bit better schedule set up, you know, whether it be who they're playing or who their road games are. I think Georgia can lose 1 game and still make it to Atlanta, but if they lose twice, which I think it's plausible, they don't make it to Atlanta and they might miss out on the playoff. But I think this team will make the playoff. I do have them missing the conference championship. I think they'll sneak into the playoff and maybe they'll make some noise there. But yeah, I think this team not even playing for the SEC championship would make them fall short of expectations. Even if they played for the SEC championship and they lost to Texas or Alabama or Ole Miss, I would say they fell short of expectation.
That's a little surprise to me, but, you know, I definitely get it. You know, even if they go 10-2, this is a team that's still right in the college football playoff. But this is definitely one of the most talented teams in college football, but it's not like the schedule in the SEC East that they had in the past couple of years. You know, looking at last year's schedule is very easy. Like you're not going to have like Kentucky, Vanderbilt every single week. If you look at Georgia's schedule, right off the bat, they get Clemson. And I think that's, you know, it's in Atlanta. So, I mean, it's pretty much a home game for Georgia. I know that Clemson's fan base is going to travel, but I don't care. Every time that Georgia's in Atlanta, that thing is going to be 75 to 25%. There's no way that Clemson fans, win that battle with them. So that's really going to be the deciding factor, you know, if Georgia could really go far here. And then after that, they have some tough matchups. You know, they play Alabama on the road at Alabama, so that's going to be a hostile environment. You play Texas. Believe that they get Texas on the road too, and then they get Ole Miss on the road. So you get pretty much all 3 of your tough games on the road, and then you can't forget about Florida and Jacksonville. I know that Florida has a gauntlet, but I think that Florida is going to be a team that, you know, the talent's there, but that schedule is just brutal for them. But yeah, I can definitely see it with Georgia as well. I'm also going to go with the top team. I think it's a team coming in is going to be Texas. I'm not really buying too much into Texas. I know that they just made the college football playoff and all that, but this ain't the Big 12 anymore. You get Michigan in week number 2 on the road. Good luck with that. Now, I know that people are going to say Michigan isn't that good this year, but That's a tough
Still a
environment.
tough road game.
Yeah, tough environment to walk in, and Michigan still got one of the best defenses in the country. They lost one of their top cornerback. They still have one of their top cornerbacks, Will Johnson. So that's and also Michigan. You know what they're going to do is run the ball. And Texas lost some of their top defensive tackles, and they lost Bo Davis. So how's this defensive line going to do? I know their offense is going to be good. Their offense can play with anybody. Their defense did lose some talent, and I think that the schedule doesn't really set up well for them. Maybe they could go 10-2. That's probably their ceiling for me. I mean, I don't really see a possibility of them going 11-1 and 12-0. They have some tough matchups. Like I mentioned, Georgia. They get Michigan. You can't forget about these middle teams. Like, this ain't Iowa State and, Kansas that you're playing anymore. Mississippi State, I know that they're not going to be good, but, they could still come in and beat you. And then you have, still the Red River rivalry with Oklahoma. They just lost to them. So, yeah, this is a very tough schedule that Texas was dealt with here in the SEC. So I'm not as high as many are on Texas. So Georgia and Texas, those are the big boys, and we have both of them falling short of expectations. Now let's move on to the next category here, and that's going to be who will be the worst team in the SEC. Wade, I'm curious to see who you go with here.
Yeah, there's some real candidates here. I'm going to go with Arkansas, though. I don't see the direction with this team. I honestly thought Pittman was going to be out after last season. They bring in a transfer quarterback from Boise State. I think that could help. KJ Jefferson leaves. Rocket Sanders leaves. I just don't see any real positives for this football team. And I think that certainly adding the competition doesn't help. But yeah, I mean, you could pick Vanderbilt, you could pick Arkansas, you could pick South Carolina if things go south for them, or even Mississippi State. But I'm at least intrigued by the quarterback situation at Vanderbilt, and I don't know. I just don't see any positives for Arkansas.
Yeah, I don't either. I had him as the worst team, but we couldn't go this without Vanderbilt now. I mean, one of us had to go with Vanderbilt. I don't see much. I know you bring in Diego Pavia for New Mexico State, but going from the Conference USA to the SEC is not going to be well for them. And I don't know. There's just nothing on Vanderbilt, their roster, that excites me. There's still a lot of problems with this defense, and their schedule is not as easy as you think. I don't really see many wins in the SEC. And they got to play Virginia Tech in the non-conference. So it's not like in the non-conference where you just get a free win. I mean, this could be a Vanderbilt team that's has 2-1 wins going in the SEC play before they get into that murderer's row. So, yeah, it's just going to be the same old Vanderbilt. I agree with Arkansas. I'm not too high on Arkansas. I think the best bet for me, Sam Pittman's going to be gone, and maybe Bob Petrino is going to be the new head coach. The way
the interim coach, at least.
That's how, I don't know. I don't know what Arkansas is trying to do. I mean, you bring in a guy that your fans just hated after what he did to your program, but whatever. That's Arkansas. But yeah, I think Arkansas, they're at best to me like a 3-win, 4-win team. Same for Vanderbilt. So yeah, those are probably going to be the two bottom teams that you see. I would be absolutely shocked if it's not. I think your other teams that consider maybe Mississippi State or South Carolina if things really go bad for them. So there you have it. Arkansas and Vanderbilt. I think that's pretty consensus of the two worst teams heading into 2024. Now let's go on to more, we go from a negative back to a positive. Who will be your surprise team here in the SEC?
Surprise team. Well, I think I'm going to go with the team that's ranked for this category. I'm going to go with Tennessee as my surprise team. I think they're in a good spot. They're ranked in the top 15. You're just not hearing as much about them as you are some of these other teams like Missouri or Ole Miss, LSU. I mean, I think their quarterback situation, kind of like Kentucky's, maybe improved, and the rest of the team really didn't change. I mean, they're going to have a new running back, but they have Squirrel White coming back at receiver. And defensively, this team, they're good. They're not great. But I really trust Josh Heupel, and they were able to keep him at Tennessee despite the Alabama job opening up and the Michigan job opening up. So that was terrific. for this team, and they got a 5-star quarterback slinging it now. So I think this team is going to be really good. I mean, they're going to be a dark horse to make the playoff.
Yeah, it's going to be a real exciting team to watch on offense. You know, like you mentioned with Squirrel Wright, they do lose Jalen Wright, who was one of the best running backs in the SEC last season. But this is an offense that's going to continue to reload and rebuild. Look at their schedule. You know, they do ease in week number 1, but they get NC State in week number 2 in the Dukes Mayo Classic kickoff. And NC State's one of those teams in the ACC that's going to be scary good. You know, you get Grayson McCall, so that's going to be a tough environment. But if they win that one, I think that they do have a path to the SEC championship. You know, you do get Oklahoma on the road, and you do have some tough matchups in the SEC like Tennessee always does. But their defense, if you saw in 2023, didn't start off good, but as the season went on, this defense got better and better and better. And they really got a lot of talent, both in the recruiting trail and the transfer portal. And I'm going to agree with you. I think that Tennessee is also the surprise team in the SEC. I could see this team going 10-2. 9-3. I think at worst 8-4 for me. I think that their schedule really sets up nicely, and this is one of the more talented teams here in the conference. So would it shock me if they made it all the way to Atlanta and to the SEC championship? Not at all. I think that this is a team that could be right there in the mix. So I would agree. I know that they're ranked, but I just don't think that many people are buying into the hype of Nico this season. And if he could play like he did in that bowl game to end the season, Tennessee is going to be the real dark horse team here in the SEC. So let's go on now. Speaking of dark horses, let's go on now. It kind of ties into our surprise teams. This could be a team that probably not really many people are talking about as much as they should. So who is that team for you?
Yeah, so then I just kind of kept working my way up. So we did, the team that will exceed expectations. I put Kentucky. I think they're going to be like 7-5, and then we went to surprise, and I think it's Tennessee. I think they're a fringe playoff team, but dark horse, I'm talking a team that I think legitimately will make it to Atlanta and have a chance to win this conference, and that's Missouri. I think that you're hearing a lot about Texas and Georgia and even Alabama, and then it's Missouri. It's never Missouri ahead of any of those teams. And I just think they got a lot of the returning pieces. They have the most dynamic player in the conference in Luther Burden. And then Brady Cook is just as good as any of those quarterbacks at the collegiate level. I like Carson Beck and I like Quinn Ewers better as pro prospects, but there's nothing wrong with what Brady Cook's doing in Columbia. And I think that he's just going to have a really good connection with Burden. And again, it was great to keep your coach Elijah Trinkowitz with a lot of these big time jobs opening up. So I think this team has one of the easier schedules. They do have a road date with Alabama and
UMass.
Texas
Can't forget about that.
And UMass. You can't lose that. I mean, you could and still make the SEC championship, but they have 2 decently tough road games with A&M and Alabama. But I think I would rather play Alabama than Ole Miss this year, or Texas or Georgia. So I think you luck out there. And A&M, I mean, that's a tough place to go play. But if Missouri's a top 10 team as advertised, they should go win that football game. So I guess my point is I think this team could have one loss, say maybe to Alabama, and make the conference championship because Georgia's got to play 3 top 10 teams. And Ole Miss has to play Georgia, and Alabama has a real tough schedule. So I think there's a chance that Missouri could backdoor their way into the SEC championship and into the playoff if they were to win. Yeah,
their schedule really sets up nice. I'd be shocked, honestly, if this team does not make the college football playoff just because of their schedule alone. I mean, they could go 10-2. I think it could really be set up nicely. So yeah, I think that they could be undefeated going into their real tough tests on the road at Texas A&M, and that's really going to decide if they can run the table. And then you have a road date with Alabama too. So like you mentioned, those are the 2 tough games there on the schedule. So this is like the year for Missouri to get back to the SEC championship. It's been since 2013 since they've been there when they faced off against Auburn in that season. But yeah, you're really looking at this team. You like what you see on the offensive side of the ball. Brady Cook's back. Luther Burden's back. You did lose one of your top running backs in last year with Cody Schrader. But I'm sure that you're going to be able to return that. But the concern for me is the defense. I don't think that this is the defense that you saw last year. You lose Blake Baker. A lot of guys you lost either in the draft or in the transfer portal. So if you're going to get Missouri, it's going to be on the defensive side of the ball. I think that this might be a Missouri team that might have to score 40 or more every game. They might be like the LSU last year. Will the defense be that bad? Probably not. But this is probably going to get into a little bit of shootouts, like the Alabama game, the A&M game even. I could see being shootouts. But yeah, it would shock me if Missouri goes 10-2 at worst. I think that's probably the worst that they could do just based on their schedule. So yeah, I'm also very high on Missouri, but looking at a dark horse team. Now this could either be a really good season for them or it could just be another middle of the road season, and it is the LSU Tigers. I think that, there is a lot of questions. You lose Jayden Daniels. Now you have Garrett Nussmeier. You pretty much lose your whole entire offensive production pretty much from last season. Daniels was your leading rusher, and then you lose Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. But Kyron Lacy is going to be your wide receiver one, and then it's probably going to be C.J. Daniels, and then you'll have the Mississippi State wide receiver transfer. And then you'll have, in the running back, you lost, Logan Diggs. So it's probably going to be Josh Williams and Caleb Jackson being your 1-2. And we know how bad this defense was. I feel like every week we were talking about how bad this defense was. But I did like what Brian Kelly did on the defensive side of the ball. You didn't really add any defensive tackles when you needed to. You pretty much running out the same corners and the same linebackers. It's pretty much the same defense. But you do have a better coaches on the defensive side. Bo Davis, you bring in Corey Raymond's back after – Florida being Florida for the past couple of years. And then you brought in Blake Baker, who was here for whenever Dave Aranda was the defensive coach. So I think, look at their schedule overall. That USC game is going to be everything for LSU. In the past couple of years, they lost their season opener and, they were able to bounce back 9-3. But their schedule really sets up nicely for them in the start, because if they go undefeated, go into the bye, they get Ole Miss at home. Ole Miss, it's a very, we talked about, it's a very, going to be an offensive shootout probably like it was last year. You're going to score in the 50s probably in that game to win. But you do get that game at home. Then you have 2 games back-to-back on the road with Arkansas and Texas A&M. You could take care of business. Maybe you lose the one to Texas A&M, but you come back home and play Alabama. Then you end your season with Florida. So I think this could be a team where they could either make the college football playoff, maybe the SEC championship, things go right. Their defense doesn't have to be elite. It just has to be average for them. I think that their offense with Garrett Nussmeier, I think that people have questions for them, but you look at Garrett Nussmeier when he steps on the field, he's going to throw at least 300 yards every single game. That's what he is. He's a gunslinger. So for me, a dark horse team that could either be very up or very down is LSU. So I just want to give you I know that you have a lot of ties to this team too, Wade. So you have anything to say about LSU going into the season?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I mean, I was between Missouri and LSU, and maybe LSU does fit the definition of dark horse a little bit more.
I know that they're 13, but I feel like there's not a lot of hype around this team right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think people aren't picking them to win the conference. I think you're hearing more individual hype for Garrett Nussmeier than you are team hype, and I think the defense is the big question mark. We know this offense is gonna be rolling. I mean, you do lose your offensive coordinator, but I think the bones of the offense are there, and I think there'll be some growing pains. I'm really worried about the Southern Cal game more than I am the Ole Miss game, even at this point. There's just not time for Nussmeier to get settled in. He's got to come out firing. I think this defense is going to need time to get settled in, and I think Southern Cal's offense is going to be ready to go. So Nussmeier is going to have to be able to answer the punches, and that's going to set the tone for the season. I mean, LSU could lose in Vegas and go 7-5 as a result. So I think that you got to win that game. I think you got to get some confidence, come home, play Nichols, iron out some of the kinks there. Just win against USC. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it done. Let the defense settle in the next week against the FCS team, and then you got your first conference road game right after that. So you got to be good by week 3, and I think this team can do it. I think this team could go 10-2. I mean, give them the losses against the 2 top 5 teams in Alabama and Ole Miss, and this team still could make the college football playoff.
Yeah, for sure. So let's now move on to our coach of the year pick. Who you got being the coach of the year?
All right, I'm going to go with a somewhat familiar face, but he's new to the conference this year, and that's Steve Sarkisian
All
and
right.
Texas. I know you're
Steve,
not
your head coach.
huge on Texas this year, but I think this team's going to be really good, and I think the SEC's got a little crush on Texas. So they did get a pretty favorable schedule, and I think if this team plays to their talent, they should be in Atlanta, and Sarkisian is going to be the guy that leads them there. So I got to go with Steve Sarkisian.
Yeah, I mean, if you have Texas being there in the Atlanta, I mean, being the first year head coach in a new conference, I mean, Steve Sarkisian is definitely going to be the pick for me. But I'm going to go in the opposite direction there. We talked about, Missouri having a favorable schedule, but a team also has a favorable schedule is Ole Miss. I'm going to go with the Lane Train being my coach of the year pick. I think I'm honestly drinking the Kool-Aid here at Ole Miss this season. I'm very high on this team. Lane Kiffin was the transfer portal king this offseason. I mean, he pretty much got everybody. Like, who cares if we lost Judkins? We'll just get every running back that we have. Logan Diggs here, come and play with us. But I don't think that Logan Diggs is going to be their number one. There's pretty much going to be a running back committee. And I mean, the wide receivers, my gosh. I mean, they're
they're
going to be like
stacked there.
Yeah, they're going to be stacked. I would feel like every wide receiver there is going to get over 1,000 yards. I'm going to say it right now. And their defense is going to be better than you think, I believe. This defense, had their growing pains last season, but I think that this defense has a lot of talent on all levels of it. So, yeah, to keep up with Ole Miss's offense every single week is not going to be fun for any SEC defenses because this is going to be the number one scoring offense in the SEC. Get ready for Ole Miss every single week to try and stop them. So give me the Lane Train. I think that he finally has a breakthrough year. Ole Miss consistent winners under Lane Kiffin, but hasn't got over the hump. I think that this might be the year that the Rebels could get through that because their schedule really sets up nicely for them to get to Atlanta. Now let's go on from the coach of the year to the player of the year. Well, is going to be any more Texas love from you? Because I feel like you're very high on Texas this season.
Yeah, and I wasn't like 3 weeks ago when we did the conference previews, but I just looked more at the schedule and, I know I picked Georgia to be my disappointing team, and they're going to be really good, but I like that game being at Texas right now, and I think that's going to be the swing game because I think Ole Miss and Missouri do have the easier schedules. So I think it's going to be very hard for Texas and Georgia to both make it to Atlanta. So I think whoever wins that game makes it there. And right now, I think Texas wins that football game at home, and I think Quinn Ewers actually outduels Carson Beck overall in the season. I mean, Ewers was the higher rated prospect. I don't think he's really reached his peak yet. I was really happy he came back to college. Both of those guys, I mean, I'm glad they're both back here in the SEC so we can watch them. But yeah, I think that as you can see, I think Texas is going to be pretty good. And I think Ewers, I mean, I think he could be a Heisman contender, even if this team doesn't get as far as I think they will if he puts up big numbers. So, I have him being drafted pretty high and winning the conference player of the year.
Yeah, I think he's going to be one of the first quarterbacks taken off the board. Will probably be Shadur, probably going first, and then Ewers will probably be the number two after him. So I think, I can see a big season for Quinn Ewers, a lot of experience. And I think when the big games come on, he has a lot of big games. You go back to that game last year against Alabama when you really took on, even in Washington, when that
Texas, he looked really good against Washington.
Yeah, whenever he was out of that game, he looked really strong for that. And he gets a guy like Isaiah Bond, like, golly, he just get the rich get richer in the Texas wide receiver. I mean, you lose Worthy, you lose AD Mitchell, but I think that Texas offense is still going to be really good this season, so that's a good pick. I could have just gone for quarterback, gone all chalk. I'm going to go with one of the best wide receivers in the nation. It's going to be Luther Burden. Will he win this award? Probably not, because this award is turned into a quarterback award. But you know what? I just have this guy going off for Missouri. I just think that Missouri's going to go where I think that they can go and be SEC champs. I think that Luther Burden is going to have a heck of a season. I could get him on there into New York in the Heisman Trophy. He could have that type of season. But like I mentioned, the Heisman's also come a quarterback award. You just hate to see it, but you got to give the talent Luther Burden. I'm sure we'll see a lot of both of these guys on a lot of teams on SEC Fantasy this year. So Luther Burden, Quinn Ewers, two really good picks on two teams that are destined to have really good seasons. So with all that being said, the SEC Championship picks, let's go in first to our matchup, and then we'll the next slide that we'll get into is our winner. So give me your matchup. Who faces off in Atlanta?
All right. So as you can guess, got Texas in there and Missouri based off that schedule.
Missouri.
I like
Big
Missouri
12 matchup in the first year in the SEC.
Yes. But yeah, I think Texas outduels Georgia at home. Georgia's got to go play at Ole Miss. Texas doesn't. So I think Texas gets there with either – honestly, I think they could lose to Michigan and run the table in the SEC, or I think they could beat Michigan and lose an SEC game and still get there. And then Missouri, I mean, we talked about them. Really, if this team plays to their expectations, they should not be worse than 11-1.
Man, that would be a weird matchup if we got it.
Yeah, I think Georgia and Alabama could be better teams than Missouri, but just the way it shakes out with the schedule, I think this team's going to be sitting in Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm hoping we get something other than Georgia and Alabama. We need like a new matchup. And yeah, you give us a really good matchup here with Missouri and Texas. I mean, let's go all the way back to the Big 12 days when these two teams were squaring off, with like Colt McCoy versus like Chase Daniel, of how long it's been since these two teams have faced off. But yeah, that's a really good pick. Could definitely see those two teams have really good seasons. Well, I'm going to have a complete opposite matchup from you. I think that's good. Usually we're like dead on. Last year I was looking, it was like we both had Georgia and LSU, just chalk and chalk. This year it's going to be a lot of different. I'm going to go with Ole Miss and Georgia. We're going to see this matchup in the regular season. I think that we get it again. The more I think about it, I would just be a complete fool for not having Georgia back in the SEC Championship. I know their schedule isn't easy. That Clemson game will definitely be a challenge for them, but I think they ultimately win that one. And then, like you mentioned, they get Texas on the road and then Alabama on the road too. So those are not easy games. So if Georgia wants to get to the SEC Championship, like you mentioned, Texas's schedule is set up for them. Even if they lose to Michigan, they would still be set up for SEC Championship appearance. So I could definitely see that. But I'm going to go with Ole Miss. I think they're going to be 11-1. Well, I'm going to say it. Their one loss is going to be on the road to LSU. I think that LSU is coming off of the bye. And at point, I mean, Ole Miss will be playing, like 7 straight games at that point. I just think they're going to be gassed by that point. LSU is going to be fresh. So I think that if they are going to slip up, it's either going to be between LSU or at home against Georgia. I could definitely see that. But I think I'm going to have Ole Miss in Georgia. I think I just really like what Ole Miss brought to the table in Georgia. I mean, looking at that roster, one of the best once again in the SEC. So I think Georgia at worst 10-2 heading into this 11-1. I don't think that anybody in this league is going to be 12-0. I think that everybody's just going to beat each other up until everybody has one loss. So you have Missouri and Texas. I have Ole Miss and Georgia. Now with that, who do you have taking the crown in 2024?
Well, I think everybody can tell by my coach of the year and my player of the year, but go ahead and give me Texas.
Horns.
Yeah, just look, I mean, like you said, all these teams are going to be good. I think they're going to beat each other up, but I just see the path here for Texas, schedule-wise, star power-wise, coaching. I think it just lines up for the Longhorns year one. And, give me Texas.
All right, we're doing hook 'em horns, and yeah, that would be a heck of a story. I mean, their first year in the SEC, and they ultimately win the dance. So we will have to keep an eye on how Texas does this season. So Wade is probably going to have a lot of burnt orange also in the SEC fantasy teams too. You're going to see a lot of Ewers, a lot of Isaiah Bond. But I'm going to go to a team that has not won the SEC championship in quite a while, and it's going to be the Ole Miss Rebels winning the SEC in 2024. Maybe I'm buying too much into the hype, maybe not. But you know what? You might as well roll the dice with this team. I think they're going to be really really good. And like I mentioned, like Missouri's schedule, it really sets up nicely for them. Like they don't have to play Alabama. They do have to play LSU and Georgia, but outside of LSU and Georgia, I don't really see a loss with this team. Really, they play to their potential every single week. I know that Ole Miss always loses a game that they shouldn't, but outside of that, I think there's realistically a chance that they worst go 10-2. But I have them 11-1. I think that they get the job done against Georgia, and Lane Kiffin wins himself the SEC, and they book their trip to the college football playoff. At worst, though, this is a team that's going to make the college football playoff. I think that I would be absolutely shocked if they don't. So Texas, Wade's pick for the SEC title. I have Ole Miss winning the SEC. So we will see how those two picks, we'll have to keep an eye on that as the season rolls on. But before we close out the show, let's roll into some hot topics. I think you already know the answer to this one. Which first team is going to do better? Well, I don't even have to ask Wade on that because he has Texas winning the whole thing, and I'm going to go with Texas too. I think I know I said they're going to be the most teams that's not going to live up to the hype, but I think they're going to do better than Oklahoma and beat Oklahoma too. I think that Oklahoma is going to be 7-5, 8-4. Texas will be 10-2, 9-3, like that. So I think that we could pass that one. I didn't know that you were going to be as high on Texas, so we'll just skip that one. The next one, who has the hardest schedule in your eyes in the SEC? Do you think it's Florida? Or do you think it's somebody else?
Factoring in the non-conference, yes, it's Florida. But you just told me that Georgia has to play at Alabama, at Ole Miss, at Texas. I mean, that's pretty brutal. So
I believe they play at Alabama. I'm going to have to check that, though.
But either way, I think probably Florida. But SEC schedule-wise, I got to go Georgia. Even if it's just Ole Miss and Texas. I mean, those are the two teams we have winning the conference.
Yeah, I would agree, too. The SEC schedule will be Georgia overall, though Florida. I mean, those last 5 games where they had to go to Georgia, Ole Miss, LSU, Florida State. Yeah, I mean, if they're going to win, they're going to win early. I mean, they do get Miami week number 1. They get UCF in between there. This is like a do or die year for Billy Napier, and this is not the schedule that you want in that type of year if you want to save your job. So to me,
I think they start out 5-0 and then lose out.
That Miami game, they have to win that if they want to make a bowl game this season. If they lose that one, they're done. I mean, UCF at home is even going to be tricky, with that offense coming in. But they do get those games at home. But they also get LSU at home too. They could potentially win that at the end of the season just because it's a rivalry game. You never know. Crazy things have happened in that rivalry. But it seems like Florida and Georgia got probably, Georgia's probably the toughest SEC, and overall has got to be Florida for me. Let's go on to the next one. Which team has the most pressure heading into the season?
I feel like it's probably Alabama. Just because you're trying to live up to Nick Saban's legacy, as we're about to talk about. So I think your coach is under a little bit of pressure, and I think the team, they don't want to be the team after Saban that disappointed, or I think they want to keep that level of standard up. But at the same time, I think people are expecting more out of Ole Miss and Texas and Missouri, but I think it's Alabama just because of the standard that's at that program.
I'm going to go with Georgia. I feel like there's a lot of hype around this team. They're coming off of a season, they went undefeated once again in the regular season, but they lost to Alabama in the SEC championship. It was oh, here we go again. The same old story with Georgia. They won back-to-back national championships. They can't get over the hump with Alabama. Well, you still have to deal with Alabama in the regular season, so you still have that game. Like we were just mentioning, you have Texas, you have Ole Miss. So this is everybody is pretty much picking Georgia to either win the SEC championship or make it to the playoff and win the national championship. So this is every year it feels like it's a national championship team or bust. I feel like this is a lot of pressure on Kirby Smart's team, especially with Carson Beck. This is probably going to be his last season. He's going to be on to the NFL. So with the amount of talent that you brought in, from the portal on both sides of the ball, Georgia, I feel like, I agree with Alabama, especially, following up Saban. You never want to do that. But I feel like Georgia, there's just a lot of hype with them. And this is, if they don't, at least make it to the college football playoff, that would definitely be a failure for the Georgia Bulldogs. Now, speaking of Alabama, how do you think they will do post Saban?
I think they're still going to be a threat. I mean, I don't think they're falling off the face of the
I
earth.
don't think so either.
I hear a lot of 8-4, 9-3. It's possible, but I think this team goes 10-2. I mean, I think they probably lose to Georgia, maybe not, and then maybe they lose to LSU or Auburn or a surprise team, maybe Missouri. So I don't think they're as dominant, but I still think there's that fear factor. I mean, the roster is not that much different.
Did you see Notre Dame and Manti Te'o, what they said about pressure?
Yeah.
Yep. Might not be as bad as that, but they're not going to be as bad as like 8-4 as people are saying. I think 9-3, 10-2 sounds about right for this team.
Yeah, I think they're still very intimidating, and Milrow's back. If anything, he gets better this year. So, yeah, I think this team's a threat. I mean, I almost put them as my dark horse because I don't think they're going anywhere. But I do think they fall just short of the SEC championship.
Yeah, great. So let's go through the comments. We had Neil chime in. What's up, boys? And he said, got to have me on post LSU week. We'll do it if it's a win. How about that? I feel like you don't want to come on here and talk about a loss. Once again, the Tigers can prevail. And speaking of LSU, let's hope LSU can win against USC. So we will have that game and more, as next week we will be diving right into it. We're going to have a full, 16 games now to pick in the SEC. So a lot of games to get to. There will be a lot of cupcakes too. I mean, there's not too many good games, but Georgia, Clemson, you'll have Texas A&M, Notre Dame, LSU, USC. Those 3 matchups that we'll be watching. So we're definitely going to keep an eye on that. And SEC Fantasy will return. And since Wade won the bowl game, pick 'em and all that, he will get the first pick. Curious to see what Wade starts off in 2024. So we appreciate everybody for tuning in. We're excited for yet another season here on SEC Talk, and hope everybody enjoys the rest of your week. We will see you back here Sunday night as we will get the ball rolling on week number 1 in the 2024 season. Should be a lot of fun, especially with 2 teams coming into the SEC. So long for now.